Welcome to the Orpheum. I'm Paul Westlake, and it was my good fortune to have led the architectural efforts that restored this terrific old theater. It was an extraordinary experience, and we're very proud of what we've accomplished. So please join me and let's look around. This is the orchestra level lobby, which is really spectacular, unlike anything you'd see in a modern theatrical venue. But before the renovation, it was in deplorable condition, along with the rest of the theater, which had fallen into disrepair and decay over the years. A really sad state of affairs for such a prominent Phoenix landmark. The Orpheum was conceived at a time when the place where one went to see entertainment was actually more important than the entertainment itself. These vessels, these terrific buildings, were wonders that attracted large crowds for what was then a new form of American expression. It was 1929, an era with 1 foot in vaudeville and 1 foot in the movies. And the Orpheum captured that technology, and a whole wonderful environment was conceived to display this new form of entertainment.
Well, in those days, that was just, everyone was abuzz with the Orpheum because it was so beautiful. We'd never had anything so lovely in Phoenix, I don't believe. And there was much enthusiasm.
The developers of the Orpheum, Ricards and Nace, spared no expense in constructing the theater. They hired some of the finest craftsmen available, and when the project was completed, the total cost came to some $750,000, an enormous amount at that time. But their investment paid off, and the Orpheum was hailed as the most deluxe movie palace west of the Mississippi. The building as a whole is a pretty eclectic assemblage of elements, which was typical of historic theaters. They would borrow the very best from many different styles. So the orchestra level lobby was designed to resemble a Spanish nobleman's gallery, and here you find an incredible richness of ornament and detail, along with some very special painting techniques. When we discovered these doors, they were painted a single color, which concealed wonderful zodiacs. We restored them on canvas and returned them to the doors, and they have become a delightful feature. The columns are heavily modeled and glazed so that you really feel their forms as spirals. If they were painted a solid color, you wouldn't see such a three-dimensional effect. But through the dark glazes and the way this is modeled, you get a very strong sense of the shape of the spiral. They're also festooned with birds eating grapes and cherubs and salamanders, and are quite wonderful in their detail. There are some wonderful details here which are worthy of note. For example, these cartouches, which are really massive comedy and tragedy, are actually the faces of the original Orpheum developers, Ricards and Nace. The ceiling is really all concrete. It has concrete beams that were painted to simulate aged and weathered wood. The coffers between the beams have a rich stenciled pattern, and it gives it a texture and a decorative aspect that is quite unique. So these spaces are filled with a rich color and a rich ornament that is radically different from the lobby upstairs. This is truly representative of the heaviest Spanish Churrigueresque architecture that's in the Orpheum, and it is quite exceptional.
I think that during that period of time, there were a lot of individuals working with their hands. But in this theater, whoever assembled a team did an excellent job, because they got the best of the best. And then they acted as a cheerleader, so to speak, and kept these people doing the best work that they could possibly do. And that's what we found in every single area we investigated. There are just so many things you don't know where to stop. The astrological signs on the door. Of all, we've executed 54 theaters. There isn't one that has anything close to that. I mean, every little detail in every corner was worked on.
The original design of the Orpheum united the theater on all levels, the basement level, the orchestra level, and the mezzanine level, by 2 exquisite stairs at the north and at the south side of the lobbies. And these stairs are beautifully detailed, both in their level of ornamentation and in form, like the elliptical shape of the south stair, which we also call the peacock stair. At its upper level, you can see 11 peacocks, which are executed in gold leaf with a beautiful aqua overlay. They're surrounded by a pattern, a kind of an aqua glaze stippled onto a gold background. Also, on the underside of the stair is a very large peacock that spreads its feathers into the luster, and it's a very rich, polychromed and glazed ornament. This is perhaps one of the most beautiful elements of this theater. You could never reproduce open stairs like these today because the building codes wouldn't allow it. It's only in the surviving historic architecture that you can find such features. This balcony is a special part of the Orpheum. It overlooks what was originally 2nd Avenue and is now part of City Hall Plaza. You can imagine patrons strolling out from the theater to this balcony and overlooking crowds below. On the face of this balcony are conquistadors, like those who came to Arizona from Mexico. They were looking for riches, but instead they found Indians they would convert to Christianity. So the allegory of the Orpheum, which pervades the rest of these rooms, changes its theme here and becomes part of the allegory of Phoenix and the history and lore of Arizona. The exterior of this building expresses a side which is exclusively Phoenix. It's not a building you'd expect to find back east or in the north. This is something that speaks the language of Arizona. With its beautiful stucco finish and tawny, sandy colors of the arid landscape, it responds wonderfully to this desert light. The cast stone corners, the forms, the tile roofs, all of these elements really feel appropriate for the Arizona landscape. It's a great symbol and a figurative part of Phoenix. We're in the lobby on the mezzanine level, and unlike the medieval Moorish gallery below us, this is the lobby of an Italian palace, inspired by the Davanzati Palace in Florence. It's almost classical. The richness of color and the natural lights that streams through the glazed doors gives the space a wonderful quality. When we found this lobby, it was painted only 2 or 3 colors. The walls and ceiling were painted a light monochromatic green, and this wonderful stenciling of the beams and all of the detail of the coffers and the moldings was missing. So we restored this fabulous ceiling, and I'm especially fond of the areas that have a field of dry brushed gold overpainted with aqua. And then there's a darker blue stencil motif. We transported that detail from the lobby ceiling to make a tie between the historic finishes and the new parts of this project. The upper walls are a faux stone. The joints and depressions are all done in plaster and simulate stone. None of the original chandeliers or wall sconces from 1929 remained, and these fixtures had to be specially created based on forms and patterns that designers thought were appropriate for the Spanish style of the building. We also had no record of the original carpeting, so we invented a pattern and palette that we felt was compatible with the building's original color scheme. But just as we were about to bid this part of the restoration to contractors, a friend of the Orpheum Foundation was cleaning trash and debris from the theater, found a piece of the original carpet, and although it was very filthy, it showed us what the pattern and the colors might have looked like, and we were able to reproduce what was here in 1929. This room is stylistically one of the most unique. We call it the Rotunda, and originally it was at the extreme end of the mezzanine lobby. This space was a cul-de-sac, a destination, kind of a retreat, and it was designed in the style of the day, the latest architectural fad, which was called Art Moderne. It has these amorous motifs, these wonderful medallions of a young couple kissing on the sidewalls. And originally it had curved love seats, and the younger patrons could kind of hide away from the adults here in this corner of the theater. In this part of the mezzanine level, we created some new openings. An elevator was installed and the lobby was dramatically expanded. In 1929, a theater such as this didn't need a large lobby. It had a steady stream of patrons coming in and out. Events didn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end like today. Rather, people would see a continuing program that included a movie short, a vaudeville routine, and an organ performance, and when they'd seen the entire program, they would leave. 1,400 patrons didn't break at the same time, as is the case with a modern performing arts center. So we needed a larger lobby, and at the same time we wanted one that would have a more contemporary feel. We didn't want to confuse people into thinking that this was part of the original design. So we used some different materials, such as bronze and mahogany, and we cut out the floor, creating a double-height space. This unites patrons who gather along this gallery with those who come out of the audience chamber on the orchestra level below, and creates a bustle of activity and vitality that can be seen from the street outside. The balcony is one of the most interesting parts of the Orpheum. It's not like the peanut gallery of most theaters, a kind of a second-class environment. It's really one of the very special places within the theater. It has a wonderful view, and at the rear a Spanish villa develops with a fabulous loggia, arches, and a tile roof. We feel we're in a town, perhaps Seville, Spain, or in an old villa in Arizona. This is typical of many movie palaces built in the 1920s. They were designed to be atmospheric theaters and make audience members feel that they were seeing a show al fresco, that they were sitting outdoors.
When we start uncovering the different objects, the more we looked, the more we found. And the more we find, the more you want to look. It was at that point in time that I realized that you're in someplace special. Nothing is left to the imagination. It's filled with color. The theater is here to entertain you completely and leave all you made to leave your worries behind and your cares behind, and you came to this theater, and until the drapes parted or the curtain lifted, you were entertained by the theater each and every moment.
Over the years, there were radical changes to the architecture of the Orpheum and what is known today as Lewis Auditorium. By the early 1950s, its character had been largely obliterated. All of this rich polychromy of reds and greens on the walls and the ornamental plaster was changed to a two-color paint scheme. In order to ensure that the audience focus was on the movie screen, the original murals on the upper sidewalls had been painted black. Fortunately, in 1929, the artist David Swing had executed these wonderful works on canvas and then applied them to the plaster. And this allowed art conservators to separate the canvases from the walls and restore them to their original condition.
We uncovered them. I took them back to the studio and removed the paint from the Swing murals, and they're beautiful mountains in Spain. They're not typical murals. I mean, they're works of art. Each one is a work of art.
As I mentioned, the Orpheum is an atmospheric theater. The audience was meant to feel that they were outdoors, in a courtyard. And to enhance that experience, lights were concealed in a cove at the very top of the sidewalls, washing the ceiling plane and simulating the sky. When you entered the theater, you felt it was late afternoon, and then just prior to the curtain rising, the sun would set and darkness would fall, and stars would appear along with slowly drifting clouds. And when this nightfall occurred, the curtains parted and the show began. Fortunately, we were able to recreate this wonderful effect.
We used to love to come early if there was a performance or something like that, because the ceiling of the Orpheum, I've just never had ever seen anything like that. There were clouds going by, and I would always want to come early before the show started so I could sit there and follow those clouds with my eyes to see if they really moved, and they did. I never did figure out how they did that.
More than any other project on which we've worked, the Orpheum has been one of invention. It's been so demanding in terms of restoration techniques. The original ornament and design is so singular that there's really no cookie-cutter generic approach. We were able to restore this magnificent audience chamber to a close approximation of its original grandeur. But when we began the project, this space had essentially been gutted. We couldn't find any drawings, and perhaps they didn't exist. And they didn't need to exist because in the 1920s, architecture was done differently than it's done today. It was more like a healthy conspiracy among artists and designers and craftsmen. So we had a lot of detective work, forensic work, to determine what was really there. For example, all of the sidewall niches had been painted over. We suspected some vestige of the original mural might have survived, and so it did, allowing us to recreate the original design motif. We also discovered the wonderful decorative scheme of the under-balcony area, the gridded pattern in which the blue panels were set to restore the beautiful chandeliers. But some problems were much more of a challenge. In order to cut a new lighting position in the ceiling, which is vital for proper stage lighting, we had to figure out the curvature of the ceiling. So in order to do that, we constructed a grid by projecting lasers from the stage, and helium-filled balloons were floated up to the ceiling, and then we measured the lengths of their strings, plotted those coordinates, fed it all into a computer, and finally were able to draw the ceiling. One of the worst transgressions perpetrated on the Orpheum involved removing half of what was one of the greatest proscenia in America. In order to install the largest movie screen possible, developers who bought the theater in the 1940s cut away 3 of these heavily ornamented ropes, changing an exquisite part of the theater. To recreate them, we had to make rubber molds and cast in plaster the forms of the original surviving ropes. And as you can see, the wonderful deep proscenium has been restored, along with these medallions of dancers and muses, mythical figures, and of course the bust of Orpheus, all combining to create this rich decorative effect. One of the most interesting elements of the Orpheum is where the proscenium intersects the sidewall, for here we find the organ lofts of the theater. Symbolically, they're the balcony of a Spanish mission. Functionally, they're among the most sophisticated areas of the theater, something you can hear but not see. It houses a wonderfully complex vintage theater board assembly with a whole array of organ equipment, pipes, and regulating devices, which let us perceive this theater the way it might have been, just at the transition from silent films with organ music to films with actual integral sound.
Well, the console contained 3 keyboards, and it was installed on a lift. A hydraulic lift that was in the orchestra pit at left stage. The pipes were almost equally divided. It had 11 ranks or sets of pipes, a set being an individual instrument, such as a trumpet, a clarinet, a flute, that type of thing. And they were installed in wooden sound boxes on either side of the proscenium, stage left and stage right, behind that ornate grille that you see down at the theater.
A new organ's been assembled that's even more spectacular than the original. It'll provide theatergoers with a fantastic musical experience and really add an incredible dimension to the Orpheum. When the Orpheum was first constructed, it was a very modern building in terms of its innovations. It had a mechanical system that could boast of 1 air change every 3 minutes. Phoenix was a hot place, but the engineers came up with the idea of bringing air down and taking it to the bowels of the building, where it was cooler, and then recirculating it through the audience, just like air conditioning, which was a very radical notion at the time. The stage is the heart of any theater. And over the years, the Orpheum stage has showcased an extraordinary variety of performers and performances. But the requirements of a theatrical facility today are considerably more demanding than in 1929. And although the Orpheum's been preserved as a wonderful historic artifact, we've had to transform it into a state-of-the-art performance venue as well. For this part of the restoration, we had to demolish most of the existing stage while at the same time preserving the entire proscenium. So we had to find ways to structurally support this huge wall while we tore down the sides around it, a difficult challenge in and of itself. The backstage area had to be totally revamped and enlarged as well. And new ceiling grids and rigging were installed, and now there is nothing that can be produced that can't be accommodated on this stage. The Orpheum has experienced many reincarnations during its history. It began as a Roaring Twenties movie and vaudeville palace, and it played host to the likes of W.C. Fields and the Ziegfeld Follies in Mae West. And it also was a venue for local productions, such as revues staged by Phoenix dance instructor Gene Bumph.
These reviews were every year, and in the spring of the year, and they were spectacular, really.
Right.
It was the closest thing to Phoenix that Phoenix ever had to a Ziegfeld Follies, I think. And he
Real
had
show
showgirls.
business.
He had showgirls. He had special costumes with lots of beautiful fabrics and feathers and big, the big headdresses, and it was very exciting.
In 1949, the Orpheum was sold and became part of the Paramount movie chain, showcasing widescreen extravaganzas. Some 20 years later, it became the Palace West, following its purchase by theater impresario James Niederlander, and served as a playhouse for touring Broadway productions. And in the 70s, it even hosted Spanish films and boxing matches.
Oh, there was all types of entertainment. We were basically the place where everyone, all the Hispanic people would come and watch movies, and it would be their entertainment. They'd bring their children, little newborns. They wouldn't even be 3 or 4 days old when they'd be here. A lot of couples met here, married, and now have children. And it was the place to come and socialize.
By the early 80s, the Orpheum exhibited little of its original glory and narrowly missed demolition. But thanks to the effort spearheaded by the Junior League, the Orpheum was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and with the support of the city, Phoenix's last historic theater was ready for a comeback. The Orpheum has risen from the ashes, like the mythical bird for which the city has been named, completing the allegory of this magnificent old building. When the Orpheum made its debut, a beacon would shine from a sphere atop this tower. Could be seen for miles around. After years of work on the part of many, the beacon once again illuminates the evening skies over Phoenix.